Hey guys, I just wanted to apologize for any type of headache I may have just caused with trying to upload myself into a lecture-based document on PowerPoint. For whatever reason, Google Slides doesn't like playing that particular file, and the audio winds up being either corrupted or unable to play. So I apologize again. Instead, what I'm going to wind up doing is I'm going to record myself here as I look at my computer monitor with the PowerPoint lecture on it. So you don't have to watch this particular video. If you want to minimize it and put it in the background, or if you want to have it side by side, some of you guys know how to do that with pulling a document off to one side of the screen and then pulling a separate thing off to a different side of the screen. Some of you guys have those capabilities. For those of you guys on Chromebooks or something along those lines, feel free to just play the YouTube clip as audio in the background and follow along with the PowerPoint presentation. I apologize again. I'm trying to do the best that I can with the technology that I have in front of me. I know this is certainly a learning curve for all of us, and I really truly am trying to get you guys the best type of education that I can give you while still learning remotely. So I appreciate you guys bearing with me and continuing up with all of your studies. So with that being said, I'm going to load up my PowerPoint here, and I'm going to start off with looking at slide number 3, which is entitled Motivation. There are some pictures down the bottom there of people building a home, or the bird itself building itself a home. The lecture itself and the reading within the textbook starts off with what winds up being instinctual. And instincts are something that are hardwired within you. So for example, seeking shelter or home, or however it is you guys would like to look at it. Evolutionary approaches to instincts are great, but they routinely fail short with what winds up being a motivating factor. We need to take a look at what winds up being both an intrinsic motivator and an extrinsic motivator. Intrinsic motivators are infinitely more powerful. Intrinsically, you wind up needing things that allow you to survive and what really burns from within inside of you. Of course, food, shelter, warmth, much like Maslow argued, as we talked about earlier on in the need, intrinsic motivators are always more powerful. Extrinsic motivators certainly will catch your eye, though. So extrinsic motivators wind up being money and coaches and teachers and your parents and things along those lines. And when talking about motivation, if we wind up moving on to the next slide, slide 4, you have drive and various incentives. Drive reduction theory is the biggest thing to pull away from this particular slide. Drive reduction theory says that we all have needs. One of our most basic needs would be food and water. And with those needs, there winds up being some type of drive that winds up occurring here. So whether it winds up being hunger or thirst or warmth or whatever that drive winds up being, that leads you into some type of drive reducing behavior. Those drive reducing behaviors would be eating your sandwich or getting yourself a glass of water after going for your jog or a run, right? Drive reducing behaviors can wind up being numerous different things, but for our most basic needs, such as food and water, your drive winds up being the hunger itself, which is relayed by your stomach into your brain, saying, hey, I need food in here now. And we talked about ghrelin and leptin earlier on in the school year. The drive-reducing behaviors can be something as simple as getting food into your belly, or getting that ice-cold glass of water after your jog or your run or your bike ride around town, so as we're all getting exercise right now. If I scroll down to slide number 5, drives and various incentives. Optimal arousal theory says that we wind up needing a certain level of arousal to want to maintain even the most basic of things, such as pulling weeds outside during the springtime, or if it winds up raking leaves in the fall, or cleaning your bedroom because your parents have told you to do so. If it winds up being too dirty, or there's too many clothes around, or whatever the case winds up being with your particular bedroom. When you're bored, your brain says, okay, I need to do something. I can't just lay around all day. Even with some of you guys who enjoy being on the lazier side of things. Eventually, your brain will say, I need to do something. With that being said, simple things and mundane things you can maintain arousal and focus on for quite some time, as the slide shows in the following slide number 6. When looking at the Yerkes-Dodson law, the blue curve is what's dedicated to difficult tasks. The red curve winds up being dedicated to easier tasks. If we start off with an easy task like pulling weeds or raking leaves or washing the car or doing your laundry, your level of arousal can wind up maintaining and being peaked over a very long period of time because it is an easy task. If you look at the blue line, the difficult tasks wind up being something that is met with a high peak of arousal very early on. This could be exemplified by taking a difficult test, or it could wind up being something that goes along with, if we were to say, for example, going to the weight room and taking on an overload too quickly, or if it winds up being all of this stress that many of us find ourselves under while we are under this particular pandemic. Your level of arousal peaks very early, but it can only last there for a particularly short period of time. After that, your arousal fades out and you can't maintain your focus and attention anymore. So at that particular case, you'll notice that there is a valley between the difficult tasks and the easy tasks. That is that optimal level of arousal, where you need to maintain at least some type of difficulty with the task in front of you so it doesn't wind up being too mundane or too easy on you. And at that point, you wind up having the Yerkes-Dodson level of arousal so that individuals can wind up having their difficult task performed in front of them, and as well as the easy task performed in front of them. As is always the case, easier tasks will wind up being able for individuals to hang on to for a more long period of time, whereas difficult tasks wind up being far more difficult or far more stressful for a person to hang on to. The Yerkes-Dodson law says that performance is based on the task in front of you. Easier is what allows you to hang on to things for longer periods of time, that level of focus. More difficult things wind up being things that don't allow you to hang on to that level of focus for too long. If I scroll down to slide number 16, you are looking at the James Lange theory of emotion, the Cannon-Barrett theory of emotion, and the Schachter-Singer, or what is called the two-factor theory of emotion. If we start off with the James Lange theory of emotion, that winds up being a very, very simplistic way of looking at emotion itself. The James Lange theory of emotion says that emotion is nothing more than a response to something that is physiologically driven inside of your body. So if your heart is racing and you are sweating and you're feeling a little trembly, that says that is fear, for example. The problem with that particular theory is that it is easily disproven by the fact that those particular physiological characteristics aren't the only reason you may be trembly, sweating, and have butterflies. That could also be anxiety and being anxious over something really exciting, like a first date. Or it could wind up being excitement over seeing a brand new car show up in the driveway because your parents wanted to treat you to something nice. Or it could be opening that acceptance letter to college that you may have been waiting for. It doesn't always have to be a fearful response just because you feel those particular physiological levels of arousal. If you look at the Cannon-Barrett theory, that says that your physiological response to things must be interpreted at the exact same time as the emotion itself. So if you go with that heart beating quickly, the trembling and shaking, the sweatingness that's going to occur, you'll sit there and say, oh, this is occurring alongside the same time as this cognitive premonition that's going on. I am being chased by a bear. My parents are yelling at me because I did something wrong. Am I going to do well on this first date with this person to get myself a second date with this person? There has to be some type of cognitive component. The problem is it's missing the critical part as to what is seen in the two-factor theory, or the Schachter-Singer two-factor theory. They agree with the Cannon-Barrett theory that there is a physiological response. The problem is they say that there has to be more to the cognitive component. You have to attribute what it is that's actually going on during that particular response. So if you were to sit there and say, the Schachter-Singer theory says that, okay, now I'm in the woods, there is a bear behind me. The physiological component is, okay, my heart is racing, I'm trembling, I'm sweaty. The cognitive component is taken further with the second factor, or the two factor, with saying, this bear may very well hurt me. Now I have to interpret that cognitive component and says, yes, this must be fear right now. If I give you a different example, you're sitting down in the classroom and there's an exam in front of you. The physiological response may be heart racing, sweating, trembling, and shaking. The cognitive component that needs to be interpreted winds up being, okay, this is a difficult exam and I need to be able to do well on this. I am interpreting the environment around me and telling myself, yes, this must be fear because I am involved with a difficult test like the SAT or the AP exam or a final examination at the end of the year. The three factors wind up being very, very different in those regards. You guys know that from doing your vocabulary, and you can certainly see it within your textbooks yourselves. If you go on to slide number 21, that is entitled Common Items That Push Our Buttons. This is regarding stress. The biggest thing to take away from stress and health psychology are one of two items. The first one winds up being Hans Selye's General Adaptation Syndrome. Selye's theory says that there are three phases that wind up occurring alongside of a stress factor. If we were to jump to the ultimate stress factors, such as something catastrophic, something that's going on right now would be a great example during this pandemic. The first thing winds up being what the actual stressor itself winds up being. Is it something simple? Is it something that I even need to pay attention to? Or is it something more complex? The stressors are what tell your body to mobilize resources as to how to deal with stress. One of the biggest mobilizations in your body wind up being hormones. And the hormones themselves are, say, for example, norepinephrine or adrenaline. Adrenaline is great to mobilize the fight response in your body. The fight response winds up being something along the lines of, okay, there's something I need to be worried about. Time to put myself into fight mode instead of flight mode or freeze mode. It is time for individuals to say, okay, I need to respond as to what's going on right now. That moves you into phase two. Phase two will wind up being resistance. The resistance phase is how we deal with those or cope with what it is that's going on. The resistance phase winds up being something that can be long and drawn out depending on what winds up being the case. For example, our first responders right now, our doctors, our nurses, our firefighters, our police officers, individuals in doctors' offices, etc., can only function for so long on adrenaline and resistance. The body will try and do whatever it can to fight off whatever these stressors are, but eventually you'll move into the third phase, which is the exhaustion phase. The exhaustion phase winds up being your body totally and completely starting to shut down. At the exhaustion phase, sickness is what's going to start to set in. It lowers your body's immunoresponse system. So a great example of that would be an individual who has dealt with mono. Individuals with mono are at the exhaustion phase. Their immune system no longer knows how to function properly, and the most simple of things will make them sick. They'll feel like they're swallowing razor blades because of the sore throat and swollen lymph nodes. Individuals in the health system right now, in hospitals and ERs, and dealing with what it is that's going on, will wind up finding themselves immunocompromised, that their body cannot fight off stressors and health-induced behaviors due to the fact that their body has begun to shut down. In the shutdown phase, besides just the physiological responses as to what it is that's going on, there wind up being psychological responses. Psychological responses can wind up being thoughts of depression, thoughts of suicide, thoughts of loneliness, which can wind up very much leaning itself into that exhaustion phase. Your reserves are depleted, your hormones and adrenaline levels no longer take you where you need to be. Sickness puts you into a more depressed state of cognition, and therefore individuals cannot respond the way that they need to. If I scroll down to where it says stress and health complications, slide number 23. The biggest thing that I wanted to highlight here, one of the final things that I wanted to highlight, are the differences between a type A personality and a type B personality. A type A personality is someone who is hardwired and rigid and does not know how to back down from a fight. They are very intense and very strongly correlated with early heart failure. If you were to look at things more visually, I would say that certain individuals that you guys have had as teachers live for the fight. I won't name any names, but you guys certainly have been exposed to certain teachers who are much, much, much more intense. Whereas type B individuals are usually much more laid back. They really would rather work towards a common goal instead of getting into some type of exchange or fight, or however it is you'd like to phrase it. With that being said, individuals will wind up working towards a more common goal. They're much more passive, they're not nearly as aggressive, they're not nearly as intense, and individuals with type B personalities usually are not linked to any type of cardiovascular problem or early heart failure. With that being said, I've lectured on the points of the PowerPoint that I think require some type of audio over. I appreciate you guys tuning in, and I appreciate you guys allowing me to work through this very difficult time. I really am trying to do the very best that I can with trying to get you guys information that is relevant and important to your AP examinations. If you guys should have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out on Remind or through email, whatever it is that works better for you. I'll continue to try and meet your guys' needs, and I hope that you guys and your family stay safe and healthy. Please take care of yourselves, guys, and I'll be in touch soon.